Hello, everyone. You're watching the ROSports show. I'm Deon Cranford. Joining me today is Kyle Pillar, our Richmond Observer sports editor. I forgot your title there, Kyle. How you doing this evening?
Good, Deon. How about you?
Doing good. And this evening's show is brought to you by Richmond Community College. So I want to thank them for sponsoring. We haven't had a whole lot to talk about sports-wise lately, and we've had some news come out this week. So we've got a couple of things to talk about. And there's actually a meeting going on tonight with Richmond County, I guess it's Richmond County Schools, to kind of decide what the plan is for schools and for sports and anything involved in going back to school. So the announcement this week by Roy Cooper to go to Plan B, I think I'm wanting to say that was kind of where everybody kind of thought it was probably going to go. Plan A seemed a little unrealistic. That was just kind of go back and pretend nothing's going on almost.
Right.
And Plan C was everything online. Plan B kind of allows both of those and gives the school systems basically an option of what they want to do, how they want to start, and how they want to hold classes. So as an educator here in Richmond County, what do you think about that decision, and what do you think is going to happen going forward here in Richmond County?
Well, like you said, I think it was the best case scenario in terms of what people expected. I don't think there's a right answer. I don't think anybody has the right answer, whether you're in North Carolina, you're in Florida, you're up north. Every state's a little bit different. But in terms of, I think I speak a lot for my wife's an educator, and a lot of our educator friends, we miss our kids. In the springtime was incredibly difficult to try to go from, your 7:30 to 3:30 day with your kids and in the classroom and making those relationships to nothing and online. And so I think the decision by Governor Cooper was definitely, I think it gives us a little bit of reprieve. I think we're excited to some extent to be back in the classroom. It sounds like Plan B, and this is, again, to be decided officially, but Plan B for middle school and high school kids, and we're talking about sports, they'll be online, is my understanding. And I believe, that decision is yet to be made and decided by Richmond County Schools. But to my understanding, so that means my ninth graders and all of our athletes from the middle school to the high school level will be virtual students, but also my understanding, those technically them being virtual students, they'll still be allowed to participate in sports.
Yeah, I think a lot of school systems around the state had kind of already sat down and said, okay, if he goes with Plan A, we're going to do this. If he goes with Plan B, we're going to do this. Plan C. Because I noticed almost immediately after he made his announcement, several school systems reported, this is what we're going to do. My wife, of course, is an educator as well. She's got a friend up in, I believe it's Orange County, who said that they are going to have some students go to class on Monday and Tuesday, and some students that are going to go to class on Thursday and Friday, and I guess Wednesday maybe is just going to be an all online day. So tell me some of the issues, and we'll get to sports in a moment, but tell me some of the issues you think may go along with a structure like that versus maybe, and see, you said that middle school and high school are likely to be online. I know you said that wasn't for sure yet, but even the younger kids, what if you had a structure like that where the kids are being divided up on different days, do you think that's ideal or necessary, or just what kind of pros and cons do you kind of get away from that?
There's, like I said before, I think this is best case scenario by Richmond County Schools. It's tough. I think the good thing is that we're moving ahead. We're not going backward. We're not staying stagnant. I think just the decision in general to continue education in the classroom of some sorts is good, especially for the younger children. But at the same time, this whole year, this whole pandemic is really unprecedented, and we'll kind of get into that with sports too, because if you would have asked me this time last year, you're out there too. We're out there Friday nights. We're at practice. It's nonstop. And if you would have asked me a year ago if I thought this would have happened, I would have said no. But I think the key with education, Deon, is just moving forward. And I know that in speaking with my principal and other teachers, nothing is set in stone yet, but they're making more rigid guidelines. In the spring, we had guidelines, but we were just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We didn't really know what was going on. Now we've got 4 months of this experience. I think we're better prepared as educators to kind of combat the virus in terms of, doing this, talking through a screen on Zoom, or, giving materials online. But at the end of the day, I think all educators, we became educators so that we could teach and to make an impact. And at the end of the day, we miss our kids, and hopefully we get back to some sort of normal soon.
Yeah, one thing I love about all y'all is y'all seem to have that approach. You're missing your kids almost, and it's become more of a lifestyle than a job to you guys, because it's all about those kids. And I'm gonna quit putting you on the spot now, and maybe we can discuss some sports things. I just wanted to kind of set up what's kind of leading into the next thing, and that is a day after that announcement was made by Roy Cooper. We find out from the High School Athletic Association that fall sports are going to be moved to at least September 1st start time. When we kind of posted that information out there, and I'm not sure if I haven't seen your story. I know you were working on one for that.
Yeah, just posted it.
Okay, there you go. So
yeah, it's been a work in progress.
So I don't know. I don't know all the contents that are in your story just yet, but I did want to mention that I did, once I posted that information and said, well, that's going to be at least 2 weeks. Coach Teal kind of chimed in and said, well, it's probably going to be longer than that, because there are going to be practices and things that will have to occur before they can start playing. I think a lot of folks are thinking we're probably looking at maybe, from a football standpoint, a conference only season. Right. Is that kind of what you're taking away from that?
Yeah, I think, again, just speculation and just kind of in talking with coaches and Coach Till, obviously, that's kind of what we're looking at. If you take away the first 2 weeks of the season, there goes the road trip to Clayton to open it on August, I believe, 18th. And then a week later, the Raiders were supposed to welcome in Jones High School out of Orlando, Florida. So I think, at this point, unless there's some sort of rescheduling or some kind of Raider magic happens, you're not going to see those games played. But as far as the conference only schedule, I think it's important. I talked to Coach Till about this, and he brought up a really good point. That all conferences are different. You have some conference in terms of teams within the conference. So while that's kind of an easy solution to say, well, we'll just cut out non-conference and we'll look at maybe an 8-week season, or we'll look at a 10-week season, you're going to have certain schools or certain programs or certain conferences altogether that can't acclimate to that just because their numbers are different. So I think, I'm kind of taking Coach Till's words here, but, he said that's something that they're going to have to look at and have to decide, well, do we do X amount of games? And in Richmond's case, if they did 10 games and they only have 7 conference opponents and they're up in the air for a couple of weeks. But in terms of limiting travel, which again, first and foremost is the players and the coaches' safety, trying to keep players condensed to a certain area. Richmond plays schools from Moore County, Robeson County, Cumberland County. So I think condensing them and keeping them closer together is probably the best option in terms of just not allowing the virus to spread as widely.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention something like that, because, we always talk about Richmond being that one school county. And, you look at some of the bigger counties that are being affected worse by this illness, but they can all kind of plan together in terms of their conferences. And you brought up a good point. Our conference is made up of not only several schools, but several school systems that may make these different decisions on how they approach athletics. For example, Robeson County and Cumberland County are getting hit pretty hard right now. And I believe both of those are kind of suspended indefinitely in terms of sports. So we don't really know where they're going to be at. So, we may say conference games only, but if Sand Hills Athletic Conference only has 4 or 5 teams, who knows?
Yeah.
It's going to leave a lot of schools scrambling to pick up opponents.
Engineering influences every aspect of our lives, from the cars we drive to the computers we use. Every modern convenience we enjoy is a direct result of the innovative work of engineers and technicians. At Richmond Community College, we are educating the next generation who will be maintaining or improving upon these products and services. Our students work with programmable logic controllers, experiment with solar energy, design and create objects with a 3-dimensional printer, and operate cutting-edge machinery. Students can choose from a number of programs such as mechatronics, welding, mechanical engineering, electronics engineering, electric utility substation and relay technology, and industrial systems. Programs that equip our students with skills for 21st century jobs. Innovative and progressive, Richmond Community College is committed to building a brighter future for its students and the communities it serves in Richmond and Scotland counties. Visit our website today.
All right, so talking a little bit about some of the things going on in terms of planning. We got to look at this idea of spring football. You know, there was some conversation that's been going on online for several weeks now about moving high school football to the spring. Um, Again, it depends on what side of your fence or the fence you're on. Personally, I'm one of these folks that thinks high school football needs to be in the fall. It needs to be played in the fall. I guess I'm okay with it moving to the spring as an absolute last resort, but I would much rather see a delayed season in the fall than have it move to the spring. And I feel like a lot of the coaches, especially in our region, feel the same way. What's your take on that?
I think, the underlying story here is that your football program, whether you're a big school like Richmond or you're a smaller program, football drives gate sales. It drives the athletic department, and it helps it in a sense. It really helps drive the funding of other sports. And so I hate to be the first thing to bring up is money, but at the end of the day, football programs drive high school athletics. And so to answer your question, I'm kind of on the same side with you. I think an ideal situation would be a fall football season, but at the same time, if we have to push it back to a midwinter, a late winter season, I think I'm okay with that. But I hate it for the spring sport athletes, the ones that already lost almost an entire season this past spring, and then just the thought that there's a possibility that they get pushed even later in the spring or into summer, or they don't get a season. I mean, I'm hoping if we're playing football in the spring that those guys and girls will get a spring sports season, because that's only fair. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a last resort to push it that late. But we don't know what we have, and really it's just kind of become this game of I shouldn't say game, but it's become this this process of them. Of the NCHS, the High School Association, changing or making new regulations or changing their schedule just kind of day to day. And that's kind of the story of this virus. And so really, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm hoping to see football, sometime in October.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk a lot about football, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of other sports to consider. Some of the proposals that I've seen from other states have done things like moved most of their non-contact or limited contact sports to the fall. And when you think of things like tennis, golf, sports like that could probably be played just about any time, moving both boys and girls versions of those sports to the same time of year. I've even seen some move volleyball to the winter, which I can't figure out how that works with both basketball and wrestling going on.
It's a lot of gym time. Yeah.
So, and then I've also seen certain states move things like some of our newer sports like bowling to the fall and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how much this is looked solely at football. Like you said, it is important because of the money that it brings into the school system, but also at the same time, like you mentioned, other sports are going to be affected if they move football. And then there's another delay in the High School Athletic Association pushes the start to fall to say October 1st, which they've actually mentioned doing that at one point. Look at how that's going to affect sports like volleyball. And it's really, then it's going to become a factor. Well, if you're moving football, how's it fair to leave volleyball with a very, very condensed season? How is it fair to leave these other sports with a very, very condensed season when they could be moved as well? The other factor you got to think about, and talking about the boys and girls sports being played at the same time, a lot of those kind of layouts had soccer, for example, both being played in the spring, boys and girls. Yeah. If it's the same coaches, or for example, with one of the issues I have already with soccer and softball playing on the same nights during the spring, girls soccer and softball playing on the same nights during the spring, is back when I was at Richmond, a lot of those girls were the same girls. They played softball and soccer during the same season, which has been eliminated now. So now you're talking about the possibility of moving other girls sports into the spring as well. And you're just going to have a lot of overlap of athletes. A lot of teams are going to be depleted fighting for players. So it's going to be interesting. Another thing you got to also consider are officials. We're having officiating issues in sports now. So there's all sorts of little issues that are going to come up other than just, ticket sales when you talk about moving sports. So
yeah. And And Commissioner Q Tucker, she was very adamant about a week ago, last Tuesday. We had a media Zoom meeting, and I believe you were in on that. And she was very adamant about not flip-flopping. She talked about how flip-flopping seasons was not a go, and then here we are a week later, and and she hasn't said anything. The high school association hasn't said anything, but it does seem a little bit more probable in terms of the smaller sports. So the soccer thing, I talked to the Chris and Ashley Larson, who are the volleyball coach and the soccer coach, and I mean, it's not very feasible to have both boys and girls soccer going at the same time. And you pointed out about how football runs from. I mean, football goes year round, but football runs, from the middle of August to, late November, early December, depending on how far you go in the playoffs. And, they're playing 12, 13, 14 games over that span. But then you look at volleyball and you look at soccer, and in a much shorter amount of time, from August to the middle or beginning of October, they're playing 22 to 24 games. So, that's something else too that I think you have to take a look at, is not only, if we flip-flop sports or we move seasons around, there's a potential loss for soccer and volleyball, in particular, to lose, up to half or a third of their schedule.
Yeah. Going back, and that's a good point, going back to revenue from ticket sales, here's another issue that's come up. If they do have football, the school systems and the High School Athletic Association aren't going to really have a lot of control over how many fans are allowed into those games. If there is a fan limit, you're also looking at lost revenue there. What are some of the things that the school could do to kind of remedy that? Because you've got certain schools that's not going to be a huge issue, but you've got schools like Richmond and some that come to mind are like Shelby and schools like that have huge followings. If you cut that in half, and not even so much in games at Raiders Stadium, you got to think of the schools that we go to that it may only have 800, 1,000 seats on the visitor side, and you're cutting that in half in terms of the number of Raider fans that travel to these games. What do you think maybe something the school could do to remedy that? I mean, if that happens.
I think it's a game too where you have to look at, do they offer season ticket holders for home games? Obviously, I think they'd have to offer season ticket holders first. But I haven't put a lot. That's something I haven't thought a lot about, just because that's so wide open. I think that obviously if you're cutting your gate sales in half to socially distance, you're going to take a hit financially. But there's resources out there, live streaming. And I know there are some loopholes and stuff like that to get through, but I've said it several times in columns that I've written, but football is the heartbeat, it's the pulse of Richmond County, especially during the fall. And I can't imagine. I've been here 5 years. I've been covering the Raiders for 3 of those years, and I just can't imagine a Friday night that doesn't involve the bleacher creatures and Mr. Butler's voice over the PA system, and Kenny Thompson as the Raider mascot and the gunshot. I mean, I just can't imagine that with the smoke and everything like that. It's just it's difficult to think about. And then what makes it even more difficult is to think that there might be half the amount of people there. So to answer your question, I don't know what the school system could do, because at some point you look at it from a financial standpoint, but at the same time, I think you have to look at it from the wellness of the community. Football brings people together. It's a positive interaction, all sports, and I don't want to just focus on football, but whether you're trying to fill up Raider Gymnasium for volleyball or the soccer stands or the tennis bleachers, sports in general are a healing element in our society. And I think, sometimes you have to take your losses at the gate, follow those guidelines, but at the same time, try to get to max capacity based on whatever the governor says is feasible in terms of how many people can be in one venue.
Yeah. And speaking of, you mentioned Butler on the PA system. I joke around because if you look behind me, you see a few Raider things. I'm in Laurinburg.
Yeah.
So I'm in Scotland County with all my Raider stuff. And my ringtone on my work phone is him saying, "Touchdown Raiders." So I annoy people all the time up here.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it just goes to show you, that football does bleed into our life, and those sports do bleed into our life, and it's such a big part of our community. Looking next on the list, we talked. Oh, I did want to mention something. I did do a poll, a quick poll online when we were discussing spring, the possibility of spring football.
Right.
Only 6% said and these are mostly Richmond fans, which is why I wanted to focus on this group of statistics. Only 6% said to move it to spring. 71% said spring is the last resort, and 23% said play it in the fall. So you look at such a large group of that saying play it as a last resort. So it just shows that there is almost a drive to make sure that football does indeed happen, even if it does mean doing something we don't want to do. So it's going to be kind of interesting. I do like the High School Athletic Association's decision to postpone to September 1st, just because it does show at least the intent to try to keep the fall sports in the fall, if at all possible. I don't think any other delays would really make high school football at least feasible. You know, there was, like I said, Q Tucker mentioned on the press conference that that October 1st was a possibility. I mentioned that before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any outcome that would allow high school football to start in October and have any sense of a realistic season, unless they did bleed it into the winter or bleed it into the spring, or move it entirely. So I think, in my opinion, I think this is probably the last and only postponement we'll get that will actually keep football in the fall and other fall sports in the fall.
Yeah, to kind of go back to the educator part too, and I think everybody has experienced some sort of delay or setback or cancellation of things, but this has kind of become common routine in terms of, for me, it's another delay throughout the spring with school, and then eventually they say we're going to be out the rest of the school year, and then we're back to summer sports, and we get the high school association lifts the dead period on June 15th, but lots and lots of school districts and programs throughout the state have yet to participate in any kind of workouts. And so I agree. I think the September 1st, in terms of football, that's kind of our last delay, our last pushback.
Yeah, and another concern that's come up, and this was in a Zoom meeting I was in a few weeks ago. This wasn't part of that press conference, but losing interest was kind of a concern among a lot of football followers and sports followers, and that they're worried that if football, say, doesn't happen, and people begin to find other things to do on Friday night to fill that void, then when football does happen again, maybe they don't leave their new found activities to go back to football. Charlotte has, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area has often had issues where fan bases just kind of rise and fall. There's often a struggle to get people to support those schools. And when you think of how many millions of people, there's probably I don't know how many people are in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County, but when you consider how many people are there and they can't get people in the stands at the football games, and then all of a sudden you're taking that away, and you're in a city like that where there's so many other things to do, and you're allowing these people to go out and find these other things to do. It's really kind of scary as to how much support's actually going to come back in a community like ours in Richmond County. I think if football just went away for a year, it would probably just come back stronger than ever.
Right.
In terms of the fan base, but it's not going to be that way everywhere. And as much as we want to focus on Richmond County, it's got to kind of be that way everywhere, or it's going to kind of lose its appeal all around. So I guess my question is, what are some of the things we can do if should football get canceled to keep people involved in the football program? Where, I work in the healthcare system a lot. Almost all of our, healthcare activities and things that we've planned all the way to the end of the year have already been restructured or canceled. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to find, I mentioned before this meeting, some things we're doing. We're trying to find all these different things we can do to keep people interested in those activities and staying healthy and doing healthy things. So what can we do as media or as school administrators or whatever to keep people involved in these programs if they're non-existent for a while?
I think really, in terms of as a community, you still have to stay vested in the interest of the Raiders. And I don't think that that's going to be a problem, whether that be, going to Friday night football games or Monday volleyball games or, soccer games on a Thursday. Because, we're very lucky. And like I've said before, we're very lucky to live in a sports community like Richmond, where you can go and you can see this stands filled out at quite a few different venues. But in terms of media, I promised through all of this that, we're going to continue the best coverage that we can give. And I'm in contact. I mean, I call Coach Till weekly. We talk on the record sometimes. Sometimes it's just a conversation between two educators. And of course, football comes up. But I think it's keeping the spirit alive, and as cliche as that sounds, when something's taken away from you, like sports are right now, I think the best thing that we can do is just to keep that spirit alive, stay invested in our players. I mean, there are lots of players. It amazes me how many athletes are on Twitter working out. Ashley Larson has been a big advocate for the volleyball team to make sure that her players are staying active, and she posts weekly or daily workouts. To see JD Lampley squatting 510 pounds at his house, and several other linemen and Raider players working. I think just keeping the spirit alive and doing all that you can do and under the circumstances, I think that's what's going to keep those seats filled on Friday nights, and whether it be this fall or next fall or whenever it might be.
Yeah, and you've done a really good job at fishing out these stories and trying to get as much information out there as I can, because I can tell some of these weeks you've had to scrape the bottom of the barrel and just find anything you can write about, and you've done a really good job at making sure that people are staying invested in it, and I appreciate that, because as a longtime Richmond fan, I mean, and I'm like you, it's just burning my soul right now, just wanting these sports back. So let's go back to not spring football, but spring sports in general. So we lost our spring season. For you and I, that's probably, and I know a lot of the football people are probably going to go, but that's probably one of our favorite times of the year. I know we love our football, but I've been a huge baseball and softball fan for years, and soccer. So it's kind of it almost feels like it's been forever since we've seen any of those sports play. What do you think that that the spring season will look like this year if there are any delays? Do you think it would be pushed back? Because I've seen some thoughts to where they could be playing the state title game in baseball in like July or some stuff like that. And I just don't think that sports should ever pass the graduation ceremony. So any thoughts on what the high school athletic association should do to protect those sports from being affected again?
Oh, I think the key word there was protect. And again, I'm not pitting one sport against the other, but at the end of the day, we had 5 baseball seniors, six baseball seniors, and a couple of girls on the softball team, several on the soccer team, not get the senior season that they deserved. And so, I believe the baseball team played 3 games, softball had a couple games, soccer played 5 matches. And so it definitely wasn't fair to them. So I think the key word here is to protect just whatever we can try to give the rising seniors. I mean, you look at players like Kirsten Bruce, and she's already committed, but I'm sure she would love to play her senior year of softball. Peyton Chappell also, she's committed to Methodist, didn't get to play her junior year. She's a varsity starter since her freshman year. So, they deserve their senior season just as much as football players, as bowling athletes, as anybody. I really, to kind of answer the question in terms of scheduling, I think it all comes down to how late does football go? How does or all fall sports, how that impacts your winter season. We really haven't talked about basketball or wrestling much, but they're the middleman there in terms of their season could be normal, their season could be crunched, it could be pushed. So it's I used the analogy the other day in an article about when the Ivy League announced that it was canceling its season, it was the first domino to fall. And so it really I think in order for spring sports to be as close to normal as we want them to be, or they can be, it all depends on how the dominoes fall, starting now with summer workouts and the most recent announcements all the way through the spring.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point with the winter sports, because most of those athletes that do wrestle, that do play basketball, boys and girls, are multi-athlete sports. And, you
Yep.
know, no matter which side their season bleeds into, whether it be the fall sports or the winter sports, you are going to have some overlap there. So it is going to be interesting to see how that works out. So this would probably be a good question for you, because you talk to the coaches, you know, obviously more than I do, but what are some of the plans that they have to take these extra measures to keep these kids safe once the Athletic Association does release the reins and allow them to get back to normal? I mean, do they have steps maybe outside of the Athletic Association's requirements that they're going to do to try to keep them safe, or do they think the Athletic Association is providing the right amount of guidance on that?
I haven't. Our conversations really haven't reached that point, just because we haven't reached that point in terms of real life or reality. But every time I talk to a coach, whether it's Keith Parsons or the Larsons, coach, it's always the safety, safety and the wellness of student athletes, and whether that's wearing a mask, hand sanitizer, hand washing stations. I mean, all of that stuff will have to be provided or outlined. Not necessarily provided, but outlined by the high school association, and I'm sure school districts will take liberties to take those further. Obviously, they'll have to meet the requirements and the guidelines, but I feel that the Richmond coaches, and I know all of them, and I know how invested they are in the success of their programs, but also the success of their student athletes in the classroom. And so I think at this point, mask or no mask, whether you want to do that or not, I think for the love of their athletes and the love of the sport, they're going to want to take extra measures. But no, I haven't talked really about extra measures, or I just, I think about a volleyball, for example. A football is shared between a couple of players, and there's a lot of physical contact in football, so there's that aspect. But volleyball, you've got 6 girls on either side of the net. And I mean, the ball is getting a lot of contact. So, are you out there with a spray can of Lysol? I mean, I don't know what the answer is to it. But yeah, right now, I just think everybody's looking forward to getting back and following the guidelines set up by the association.
Yeah, and I'll apologize for not knowing this, because I haven't really looked into it, but we've mentioned volleyball, basketball, and wrestling now. And, all of those are gym sports.
Mm-hmm.
Are they maybe looking at gym sports a little bit differently than they're looking at the outdoor sports in terms of safety? Because, you are in a gym and you are going to be a little closer to one another.
Yeah.
Was there any thought going into that?
I mean, I think it's much easier to spread out people in a football field. Obviously, it's a bigger venue. It's outside. Yeah, but, in the gym, I think more restrictions are going to have to be put into place. I haven't talked to Rob Ransom or Jim Butler about any of that, but, common sense tells me that, yes, there'll be a little bit they're going to follow the instructions everywhere, but in terms of being in the gym, you're in more of a confined space. Obviously the virus can travel or be transmitted a little bit easier indoors. So right now, again, I don't have that answer, but I'm sure that they will.
That's fine. I mean, I'm sure we're probably all going to get guidance on that very soon.
Yeah, we're just all kind of learning as we go. It's been a big learning process for a lot of people.
Yeah. So, and to kind of add to you, so you mentioned that middle school and high school will probably be doing online classes, at least for a while. What are we looking at in terms of transportation? Because one of the things Q Tucker brought up in one of the meetings was, okay, look, if these kids aren't going to school, how are they getting to practice? Most of these kids go to school, then just stay after school to go to practice, and then somebody picks them up later. You might have a lot of these kids that don't have transportation. Are they? So, that's another concern. We're going to have to think about if we do have online school, but we have on-site practice and on-site sports, we've got to come up with some sort of way to get them there.
Yeah. And recently, I forget who I was talking to, but I think the number had jumped from X amount to, I think 24 students could ride on a bus if you spaced them out. And don't quote me on 24, but it was somewhere in that, somewhere in that range of that many student athletes. And, but yeah, that's something I think that's kind of slips by the wayside in terms of, I mean, you and I think about that, coaches are aware of that. But, you know, to the average sports fan who just wants to see football or to see volleyball or soccer or basketball, you know, that's not really at the forefront of their minds. So, you know, whether it's, you know, you ask the parents to caravan, you have, I mean, but even then you can only get X amount of kids because you don't want to have, you know, a family pick up 3 or 4 other players. And then now you're kind of broadening the I guess the radius of the virus of potentially spreading. But yeah, I think that's something that when the time comes that we do have athletics, that'll be taken into great consideration by the district.
Yeah, when it comes to safety, and you know, I might step on a few toes of this, but there's all these people that pop up online. Y'all just want sports to play. Y'all aren't we're concerned about the kids. You just want sports. You just want sports. And when it comes to the safety of these students and these athletes, safety has always been number one on the mind of these coaches. I mean, before a pandemic ever hit.
Right, absolutely.
So I mean, a lot of folks just need to kind of loosen up on that argument. It's not about, you know, it's about getting these kids back into something they enjoy, getting them away from the video games that they've had to sit in front of for the last 3 months because they can't go anywhere. You know, just to get them out there, get them back together, get them back to what they love doing. And you know, yes, it's dangerous, but it's dangerous anywhere right now. I mean, it's just as dangerous to go to the football field as it is to go to Walmart. So, you know, I think a lot of people need to think, at least with these coaching staffs that are already, you know, their mindset is already focused on their safety and keeping them safe regardless of COVID-19. They're probably safer there in reality than probably most of the things they're doing right now in terms of keeping themselves occupied. So, I mean, I think a lot of people do need to lay off that argument a little bit.
Yeah, the safety, I agree with you 100% about the coaches always being about safety. It was just a different type of safety. It was making sure that, you know, you're hydrated in the heat. You're making sure that you're conditioned, that you stretch before. And safety is always at the forefront of coaches' minds. But something else, I just thought about this too, about you saying that people are all about sports. There are futures at stake. And I don't know if this was on your list of questions, but you know, you look at last year, there were 13 Richmond football players who signed to play in college, and only a couple of them had made their decision prior to their senior season. And you look at guys like Jarrell White, who was coming off a knee injury his junior year. He needed his senior year in order to get that offer from Shaw, which is where he's going. You look at Zaire Baldwin, who's going to Lewisburg, and there are, you know, Noah Altman, a great kid, very smart, very athletic, backup quarterback. He needed his senior year to prove to Brevard that he can play. And of course, I'm using football here as a reference point, but Georgia Grace Anderson, you know, she's a volleyball player, very bright young lady, but she needs her senior year in order to make her decision. And, you know, she was supposed to meet with schools and you know, and not just her, but a lot of kids were supposed to meet with schools. Mac West, a kicker on the football team, and had all these plans in the spring and the summer to visit campuses and to try to, you know, limit or pick out their future, and they can't now. So, you know, when people, you know, and Deon, we're a different kind of person when it comes to sports. I mean, if you're a sports fan, you're a sports fan. You know, you bleed it. And so I think the people who don't understand that or don't like sports as much as us, they're gonna make that argument. But at the same time, sports are healing. Sports are a lot of people's futures. And really your senior year helps determine quite a few student athletes' futures in terms of playing college.
Yeah, that came up in the video with Q Tucker, excuse me. Somebody actually asked, you know, what do these bubble what do these bubble players do who are kind of on the fence as to whether they're going to play at the next level or not, or whether they've got multiple options to choose from or not. What are they going to do if they don't have their senior year? So you're absolutely right. I mean, getting that in for them is a big part of deciding their future. And I'll be honest with you, I've reached the end of my list. So I'll give you a moment if you want to put any closing remarks in, and I guess we can wrap this show up.
Yeah, I thought your questions were great. This is my first appearance on the ROSports show, and that's something I'm sure Russell will put in our graphics at the bottom. But I guess the shocking thing is the ROSports show has done over 150 episodes, I believe, and this is my first one, and I had to think about that for a second. And it's not because I don't want to be here, but it's because I'm covering 3 or 4 games a night. And I'm very passionate about what I do, and I think that shows through my writing. And this has just been an incredibly difficult time, just trying to process, because the pandemic's a lot bigger than just sports or just school. It's, you reflect on a lot of things. I spent a lot of time cutting my grass during the pandemic because there's yard work. There's not a whole lot to do. So there's, a lot of time to reflect. And there was a time that I think we all took sports for granted. I think that you wake up on a Friday morning and I go and I teach my English classes, and I know that I'm going to be at Raider Stadium or I'm going to be somewhere in the Sandhills covering a football game. I got used to spending my summer mornings at, summer workouts, whether that be tennis or, making a trip out to Foxfire for golf or what. I mean, this whole pandemic has really taught me a lot of things about, not taking things for granted. And I kind of fell into that. I mean, I think I speak for a lot of people, because nobody, I think, thought that sports would be taken away. I remember being at Jack Britt on March 12th, the girls' soccer game. Jayla McDougald scored, Caitlin Huff scored. I remember all of these things, and then I just remember getting the news and sitting in the bleachers. And actually, I was at the track and field meet at Scotland when we got the news about that. So I just remember just how devastating it was. But at the end of the day, like this is making us better. This is making me a better sports writer. It's challenging me to find those stories. But I also think it's making people better in terms of when we do get things back, we'll be more appreciative of it. So thank you for your questions. I really enjoyed being on tonight.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And once again, we want to thank our sponsor, Richmond Community College, for sponsoring this episode. We appreciate their support, and we want to thank everybody for watching. I'm Deon Cranford. Joining me was Kyle Pillar. We'll look to do this again sometime in the near future and keep a ROSports show going. Whether we have sports or not, we're going to find some stuff to talk about. If you do have any sports going on that you know of, maybe some AAU teams or things like that you want to share with us and let us keep up with you as well, please don't hesitate to let us know. But thanks for watching, and good night.